Welcome to part 2 of this lecture on the metaphysics of evil and Berserk, Tony Wolff's piece. And in the last lecture, I discussed distinction between continental and analytic philosophy, a little bit about why we're using this piece and why we're talking about continental philosophy, and I also talked about free will and determinism. So if you're a little bit lost, let's go back and look at that again. And I want to start with this, breaking down the ontological framework that Wolff gives us. Now, again, Wolff is using a legitimate methods from continental philosophy and applying them to Berserk and trying to draw some lessons about our own world given this analysis. It's a pretty cool project. We've already talked about ontology a little bit. Go back to Descartes. So ontology is just the things that exist in the world. So for Descartes, he starts with a very restricted ontology. Us, God. Well, to be more specific, him, God, right? So that's his ontological framework in the very beginning. So the ontological framework, the things that exist in the world of Berserk, they exist on the material plane, astral plane, and the plane of ideas. So the material plane is just where, people are getting up to their peopling, their mundane actions. And on the astral plane, that's where gods and demons, that's where they come from. And then the plane of ideas is where the idea of evil exists. And the idea of evil and its causal impact in the world of Berserk on the material and astral plane are because this plane in Berserk is the most influential. And this goes back to the sort of framing of idealism as the idea that our ideas can influence reality. In Berserk, this is quite literal. By thinking of evil, it begins to have causal influence on the world. Which is why we're going to talk a little bit about the idea of evil. To kind of explain what's going on there. So humans suffer in the world of Berserk. They suffer in our world, but they suffer in the world of Berserk. And we want to explain this suffering in Berserk. And so they say, suffering exists because evil exists. And then through this sort of unconscious activity of, evil exists because, or suffering exists because evil exists. Evil begins to take on this causal impact on the world. So what happens is that evil influences events and people to cause more evil. That's the idea of evil in the world of Berserk. And this parallel to real world, our world, idealist traditions, that some of which do make this claim that we have this serious impact on the world around us. And again, without buying into the idea that we can, if you've ever interacted with the Warhammer 40k world at all, the orcs there, they believe purple makes them invisible, and thus the way that their magic in this world works is through their power of belief. So they believe purple makes them invisible, so when they see something purple, it's it's invisible. So they paint themselves purple and it makes them invisible, not just to themselves, but to other entities. We don't have to accept that level of idealism, but we can accept a simpler, less, more parsimonious example of idealism, which is sort of the one that, James is putting off, where, we treat somebody as trustworthy, they might act in trustworthy ways. We act as if we can do something and we can accomplish it. If we act as if fatalism is true, for instance, that it doesn't matter what we do, it's all we're not even going to try, though that's going to have an impact on the world. So, for instance, you think you're going to fail a test, you don't study, you fail the test. Okay, well, that's a form of idealism, right? You acted in a way based on your idea of the world that resulted in a particular outcome on the world. And so what's going on here? So the idea of evil, to recap, just an idea to explain the existence of suffering in the world, and it becomes so powerful given the way that reality works in Berserk, that it becomes this causal influence on the world. Evil becomes causally efficacious. Well, where do people fit into this? Well, Wolff says that it's really interesting that when people become agents or actors on behalf of evil, it's a finitude. It's an ending of humanity for them. So what he means there is there's a lot of capacity for humans. And when the evil person in Berserk chooses to become a servant of evil. They are choosing to end their humanness. They do this a few ways, right? So they become simply driven to prioritize their individual desires. So what their goal is, fulfill their desires. And in this case, the desire is for power. So they become just an animal interested in fulfilling their desires. To do this, they have to sacrifice a loved one. And the sacrifice, the way that Wolf describes it, severs human empathy. And human empathy is just the ability to give a crap about other people, right? And so here you're severing your ties to being human. You're just this thing that fulfills your desires. Your existence as a human is coming to an end. You're no longer essentially human. And in doing so, you're limited. You're confined to this narrow existence to fulfill your desires. You become this hollow, non-autonomous. You lack true autonomy because you become a servant to evil. He describes it as being consumed by the evil they serve. So that's what he means by finitude. You just stop being human. You become this thing interested only in fulfilling your desires. And if you become particularly powerful through the sacrifice of a loved one, and it's really interesting his discussion about how sacrifice transforms both the sacrificed and the sacrificer. Like the person, like both stop really being human in that moment. They give up their humanity for power, and in doing so become agents of like a more powerful evil, that idea of evil. And eventually the God hand is able to fulfill the plans of evil. So like evil has this causal power, and the way it's causally active in the world is through these God hands in the world of Berserk. And again, to emphasize, these individuals lose free will. They lose autonomy because they become servants of evil. So where does, and again, that's this free will bit here, where does a character like Guts fit in? So if you're familiar with Berserk, you're familiar with Guts, but Guts is also mentioned in the Wolf piece. Like, well, characters like Guts step outside of the predetermined evil that exists in the world. So again, just to go back a little bit, this idea of evil is causally efficacious on the world of Berserk, meaning that these evil events are determined. In much the same way in the last lecture you were determined to eat cereal, in this world, evil is determined. Except characters like Guts step outside of this determined flow of reality by choosing to be good. So they step outside of this world, they resist predetermined evil, and in doing so, just like evil can exist as an idea, good can exist as an idea. So they're instantiating the idea of good and its causal efficacy in the world. So that's how they get a little bit of free will, a little bit of moral agency in the world by just choosing to be good. They don't say, well, we live in a world where evil was predetermined, so we can just be evil. They say, no, actually the choice still matters. Parallel that to our world. Who cares if we live in a determined world? We can still have a little bit of wiggle room. This is what the compatibilists will say. You just need a little bit of wiggle room, just enough free will for our choices to matter, especially these very important ones where we kind of resist the flow of evil. Even if we step outside of this metaphysical discussion, we can talk about like the society we're in. We say like, oh, well, this is how the world works. Like, for instance, somebody might have said to you, like, the world just isn't fair. Okay, but maybe you can be the Guts of this world and say like, okay, just because it's usually not fair doesn't mean I get to act in ways that are unfair. I can choose personally to be fair. So we get like a little bit of a parallel there. So just like in the world of Berserk, where like evil literally has a causal role on the world and is acting almost like God in this world, there's still this ability to resist and choose good. Similarly, in our own world, okay, so what if it's determined? There's still this sense in which I can defy this determination and at the very least choose to be good, whatever that looks like. So the idea is a little bit of agency still exists. Still get a little bit of moral agency. If that's true of our own world, great. Definitely seems to be the case for Berserk. So that's the real upshot here. That's like, we're going to talk about evil, but we're also going to, like, the goal here is to kind of understand our own world through looking at this fictional world, so we can understand evil a little bit better. Your discussion asks you, like, is it fair to describe people as evil? Is the actions that are evil? But if our world is determined, just like Berserk's world is determined, then we don't get to say, like, it doesn't matter what choices we make because it's determined. We still get a little bit of moral agency. What does it look like to make choices on a deterministic framework? And then those are the sort of takeaways from this discussion.